Hello, and welcome to the Pro Series Conversations from CheckBox Pro. My name is Missy, and I'm the founder of CheckBox Pro, where we help school leaders become their most efficient and effective selves by matching them with ed-focused executive assistants. Each member of our team has over 10 years of experience in the education sphere, and though we may consider ourselves pros in some areas, we can't be an expert in every area. This is why we are excited to bring folks working in the education space to offer tools, tips, and insights to make the life of a school leader even more sustainable. Today, I'm talking to Amy Martorano. Amy serves as partner and broker for the Central Region of Insight EFS. Amy works with educational clients and property owners managing intricate transactions for her clients on a national level. Throughout her professional career, Amy's expertise has spanned a myriad of real estate transactions, and she is skilled in her innovative approach and unwavering determination in orchestrating successful deals. Amy's comprehensive professional background spans acquisitions, dispositions, commercial leasing, asset management, appraisal, development, renovation, and design. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's so good to have you here. It's quite a list. It's quite a list of things that you do. So I told you I'm doing like a little mini series, right, on securing a facility because, as you know, right, many charter and private schools, like this is a major pain point for them trying to find a facility and navigate that whole world of professional expertise that you bring to the table. For us, right, it's just a totally different language, and it's a different space in which our leaders have to navigate. So like I even joke, like I've done one of my earlier clients, like I did a facility walkthrough with them. Just they were in the Austin area, and I was like, oh, can I join? And like walking through a building and having to sit there and visualize, like, how can this building that was not built to be a school to become a potential site for a school, like is just kind of trippy. But beyond just finding like the right space, like you also have to consider all of the nuances of like whatever contract or like lease agreement and like how all of that is going to fit in and fit the needs of that leader. All that to say, Amy, you have the very difficult job today, right, of making the complexities of your real estate world for schools specifically accessible to us normal folks.
Good.
Without further ado, can you just walk us through and our listeners through, like, what's the general process of finding and securing a facility for, I'm going to say charter schools, because I think a lot of our leaders who are listening are charter school leaders, but I think the same could apply to, a private school, a Montessori style school. So just what's the general process of finding and securing a facility?
Yeah, it's certainly a process. It's definitely a collaboration. There's so many moving parts. There's so many people that you're going to be involved with in this process. And it usually is quite lengthy as well. So one thing, I think the most important thing in securing a facility is allowing yourself enough time to do so. And so if we're looking at a school that's just opening, you're going to want to start your facility search in tandem with your charter application writing. It might seem like a little bit, too early to do that, but locating a facility, just locating it often takes quite a bit of time. Like you mentioned, it is a difficult task, and it's such a barrier to entry for schools to get open that you've got to give yourself enough time. So that is just key. I can't stress that enough. And then there's other things that you've got to have in place before you really start going to look for a facility. And those things are understanding your affordability, getting some funding in place, either preliminarily or just really securing it altogether. You've got to understand your market from both a demographic standpoint and what the real estate market looks like in there. lease property costs, if you're looking to purchase property, what you can anticipate spending. And, there's always some nuances to all the deals, and, schools have pretty specific affordability, but it's good to understand kind of where you stand, before you even start to look for a facility. Some other items that are really key is assembling your team and making sure that everybody understands your goals, the mission, what it is exactly that you should be looking for, and that team is going to help guide you throughout the process. Every part of the team will have their own expertise, and so I'm a broker, so I will be the person on the team locating the property, speaking with the sellers or landlords, negotiating the deal with the rest of the team. And then you also have potentially your architect, project management consultant, financial advisor, and your attorney. And all of those people will come into the transaction or into the process at some point, right? It's really important to have a good team built that will help you navigate this process, because it is really hard. It's hard for everybody involved. So, you're not alone, but it's not insurmountable, but it's not for the faint of heart either. There's always issues that come up on every transaction, and working through whatever deal that you have, either a lease or a purchase, and coming to terms with the other side of who you're working with, and ultimately closing the deal and getting the school open. So once you have all of that, then you're ready to really dive into the search. And when clients of ours start the search, I think what they often are surprised by is how few options you typically have in any given market. Some markets are a little bit more open than others and have a higher availability of school property than others. It just kind of depends on the age of the market, the school and charter school landscape, how many schools are there existing, how the city is growing. And so for us, we would start scouring everything that's on market. And then we also do a very heavy off-market search as well.
Okay.
And we've got some, ways to go about doing that that helps streamline the process. But oftentimes the properties that we end up closing transactions on are off-market deals. I would say it's probably 50-50. The two processes are necessary, so both on and off-market search. And again, this takes time. So anything on market, you can just pull up the listing, but an off-market search, you're contacting owners, cold calling, and trying to drum up some options. And so it's not often that I have somebody who's just ready to go and has been waiting for my call. So it's a lot of educating sellers or landlords on what a charter school is, how they operate, how they're funded. And there's a lot of discussions that take place. Once we find the transaction, find the property, and move into kind of the trading paper aspect of the transaction, there's a lead up to that as well. So we typically start with drafting letters of intent, and to draft, review, and negotiate a letter of intent could take months. Just in the normal course of business, you've got the drafting of it, discussions with the other party to understand where they are and what key points are important to them. And then working with the attorneys, they'll need time on their side. And then, a document can go back and forth several times before it's actually finalized. So that process can take months. I would say usually LOIs, they're anywhere between 2 and 4 months to get finalized. It just depends. Sometimes they go faster, but not typically. So I think in my almost 9 years of working with charter schools, we've only had one LOI that was, wrapped up within a month, because we had no choice. Everybody, it was all systems go. So we had to get it done. And I wish they all went like that, but it was intense. So, but to give everybody a comfortable amount of time to do that, then you need at least a few months. And then once you have that agreed upon, then you move into either a lease or a purchase and sale agreement. And again, those can take some time to finalize as well. So give yourself a month or two, sometimes longer. Hopefully it's not, but it just depends on the transaction. And then once you are under contract on a property, then you have your contingency period. And in that time frame, you're going to be doing your due diligence on the property. With schools, we do quite a bit of, I like to call it pre-due diligence. So there's a lot of information about a property that we have to understand before we really even make an offer on a property, and that information kind of gets tied into the offer so that we know what we're offering on and potential issues that we're going to have to deal with on any given property. So it varies from transaction to transaction. Every property is different and unique, so there's always things that come up in a transaction. And having a good team, like I mentioned, is going to help you navigate those issues and overcome those issues, hopefully and ultimately. And then once you get through your diligence period, in that time frame, you're doing your discovery on the property, you're lining up your financing and funding, and then, mobilizing your staff to get prepared to occupy the property. So all in all, that process can take a year to a year and a half from start to finish, sometimes longer, but usually a year to a year and a half is a good amount of time to allot towards that process. And then there's a bit of a nuance just in terms of like what type of transaction you're going after, whether you're looking to purchase land versus buying or leasing a building. And land transactions, you want to start that process like 2 to 3 years out before you're opening. Land is most schools now, because of the real estate market and just, capital markets where they are more focused on buildings and leasing buildings or buying buildings and renovating them. But, I've done quite a few land transactions, and, you have to understand where your utilities are and, how you're going to access the property. But I do like land transactions because you're just starting fresh. You get to build what you like. So, but that's, the process in a nutshell. Yeah.
So I'm going to go back for a second because, obviously, I would say a lot of listeners have either navigated like their own personal, right, residential, whether purchasing of a home or a leasing of a home. I'm going to go all the way back to when you talked about assembling your team and you referred to yourself as a broker. Ignorant question. Can you tell me the difference between a broker versus like a real estate agent? Like, as I think about real estate agent being the ones who are finding properties, but, you mentioned as a broker, you're doing more than just like showing a property, like, have the keys to the property and opening the door. So yeah, what's the difference there?
A broker is just a higher level of licensure, and usually a broker oversees an office and can have licensed agents underneath them. I've been in real estate in various capacities for 24 years now. And so I do have my broker's license. I was an agent for a long time, but that's the main difference. Experience. You have to be, licensed as an agent, sales agent for a certain amount of time and complete a certain amount of transactions to get your broker's license.
Got it. Okay. And then the other, I felt like this was a difference between, again, this process of finding a school building. You mentioned the time-intensive letter of intent process, and then you're rolling into a purchase and or like sale or lease agreement. Why is it like, what is it, or is letter of intent essentially like an offer, like would be the equivalent of a residential offer letter? What are those two differences there?
So letter of intent is non-binding, and it's a general outline of the terms of your transaction. So in a letter of intent, you're going to be working out kind of the big picture items and some of the minutia as well. They are, they're an important step to understanding whether or not you think this deal is going to work out, just from, a relational standpoint, and then just looking at all the legalities of the property and making sure that both parties are on the same page before you start drafting the binding legal document, which is either purchase and sale agreement or a lease agreement. They're legal, they're binding. Once you sign it, you're locked in.
You're locked in. Scariest day at that signing table. Okay, perfect. So, okay, and then you mentioned, ideally 12 to 18 months for like a building, whether that be a lease and or, finding a building and renovating. I'm assuming if you're going to do a renovation, then you need to be on the longer end of that. I guess maybe it also depends on the scope of renovations, but
right. I should clarify that. Yeah. So that 12 to 18 months is really just for the process that I just described. So after you close, you could have another year or so of construction, or longer. If you're developing land, you might need to get entitlements on the property, and then, go through the construction permitting and then the building. So that's why I said, like on land deals, we're looking at 2 to 3 years out to give you enough time to do all of that.
Got it. Got it. So I'm trying to think like, yeah, I'm a new school leader. I've just submitted my charter, or I'm writing and submitting. So they usually have a planning year first, yeah, the year as they're generating their charter. And then they have, so yeah, they usually have hopefully 24 months that they can go through all of that, plus then outfitting a space once they find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That feels
It's long.
stressful. That feels stressful. I've also known some folks who are like, feel like they're moving in like as students are coming in the door.
I mean, it's oftentimes like that because if there's a cutoff where if you don't hit that cutoff and you can't, you don't have your enrollment efforts going and you're not going to be ready to open, you're going to have to call it.
Yeah.
Again, that's why you've got to leave yourself plenty of time to do this. And it might seem like too much, but there's never too much time. There's definitely not enough time.
Right. Yeah.
Never too much.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about the different types of spaces. Are there specific building types or layouts that tend to work well for charter schools? And if so, why? What makes them better than others?
Yeah, so I kind of maybe break this down into a new school versus a growing school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for new schools, what's a really common method to find a facility just to get open in a temporary facility? It's really common to go try to find a space within a church. Churches oftentimes have educational space for Sunday school or whatever ministries that they're conducting within their organization. So it has been very common to try to find, existing educational space to backfill, whether it's church or, maybe a preschool has closed down. And I've seen, schools go into former preschool buildings. They're usually not large enough to facilitate, more than just a couple years worth of occupancy. So in that scenario, your real estate search continues. So you could get into a church knowing that it's going to be a year or two or another temporary facility, and you still have to continue the search for the permanent location at that point. So this process could be years long, very well could be 2, 3, 4 years long until you find your, permanent facility. And in that time, that gives the school enough time to grow, transition into a larger facility. And for schools that are existing and are looking to buy a building to expand their enrollment and just add some more square footage, we've worked on several transactions where we're looking at old office buildings that are vacant, call center buildings that are no longer being utilized. Those are oftentimes like a light industrial flex space, which means that it's just kind of a shell type building that's pretty simple, that's got plenty of parking on a decent sized lot. And oftentimes they're very open in terms of their floor plan. We've got some offices and bathrooms, but you can imagine and picture like a sea of cubicles that are no longer there. And those are great to be able to just kind of come in and retrofit the space to school use. So you're adding in classrooms and cafeteria space. Sometimes they have higher clear space. So that's nice, you can get a nice sized gym in there. It might not be, regulation, but you can make it work. Or sometimes schools just build a gym onto, an existing building, because it's not very often that you find an office building or any other building for that matter that just has a gym. Yeah, it's kind of a key element of a school program. So, and then let's see, we've closed on some larger office buildings, in the like 70 to 100,000 square feet range. And retrofitted those into schools. So the only types of buildings that we just don't really go after are just, class A office space, these larger office buildings where your use is not a fit and then the affordability is not a fit. It's not really going to work. Some smaller schools are open to locating in retail centers, and there's some benefits and some challenges to that. The challenge is obviously it's not a school campus feel. So it really kind of depends on where you are in the center, where you're located. Can you maybe carve out a little portion of the back of the building for play area and outdoor space? I've seen that work, successfully, but it really just depends on the center, the mix of users, and the site. So it's really individualized, but those are kind of the primary building types that we look at.
I worked at a school in Memphis, and they occupied the old Federal Reserve building.
Oh.
So it was 3 stories and a basement. And this was an all boys school. It still exists, an all boys school, 6 through 8. So middle school boys start to get pretty big. But I mean, imagine like a bank building, right? Like the halls are fairly narrow. They had good class sizes, but what was so fun was one of the classrooms was actually where they used to back the trucks up to load it with money. And so they had like these staircases, like, so it felt almost like an auditorium, but it was just a classroom size. So it was like really interesting to see how they made that space into a classroom. And then the vault downstairs, it would make for a good storm shelter, but we used it as like a library. And so it was like, had this huge open like vault door with the locks and everything. But to your point, it was like, I think the church owned it at the time. So anyways, it just worked out. And I mean, they're still occupying that space and they're making it work, but you do have to get really creative. Like as a former operations person, trying to think through arrival and dismissal procedures for a place where you're downtown, like you're downtown Memphis, or thinking through like, okay, yeah, we don't have a gym. So now we have to get creative about who we're partnering with in the organization to be able to get our kids gym space or to get outside time, or just even transitions. It's like, well, we can't do just a mass transition with hundreds of boys because there's not room in the hallway for them to both, to have 2 lanes of traffic going through. So it is just I applaud charter school leaders because they do get really creative with their spaces and what makes, what they can make work, to meet their needs. But man, a new land with like a brand new building sounds really lovely.
Sounds so nice. It is so nice. That's a luxury. It really is. And those are for the more mature schools who, have a track record and growing enrollment and have been successful and then are able to afford that type of development.
Yeah, that's what I talked to Drew Masterson on my last episode. He's a financial advisor. And that was kind of what he said. He's like, don't get sucked into like finding the perfect building right away. Like get in there, get your academics on point, make sure your enrollment is where it needs to be, because that actually is the thing that's going to unlock the funding that you need to be able to then go in, like what you said, right, in 2 to 3 years to go find that more permanent space that is going to allow you to do more for the students you serve. But you're going to just be, pushing a rock up the hill if you just try to do it all beautiful in the onset and can't keep up with academics or enrollment. So
yeah, you don't want to be underwater because your facilities are too expensive or too high of a percentage of your funding, and it's just not a good place to be. You're setting yourself up for disaster.
Yeah,
we don't want to do that. We want our clients to be successful.
Talk about cost, which I don't even know if this is like an easy question to answer, but like what should school leaders expect when it comes to renovation costs, or like, I hear this term tenant improvement allowances, right? From landlords, which I'm like, what? So, I mean, loosely, like, what do they need to be planning for in addition to just, making sure they can pay their monthly lease or, the down payment? I don't even know what monies is involved in buying a space.
Yeah. Well, so for new schools starting out, really the objective is to find the space that requires the least amount of work, because it's going to be a temporary facility. You don't want to put a lot of money into something that you're just going to move out of in a year or two. I mean, every property is different, right? And then aside from just what you like and what you want, there's building codes and there's TEA regulations that you've got to comply with for safety and security and other things. Is there a sprinkler system in the building? Is there a fire alarm system in the buildings? There's kind of a bare minimum of what you need to operate a school. If you're looking at a space that has none of those things, that might not be the space. If you don't have the ability to get some tenant improvement dollars from either the landlord or, your own funding source. But, the renovation costs vary from building to building, right? It just depends on what the condition of the building is in, right? But I think the last kind of number that I've heard in a really involved renovation, basically kind of a gut of a building renovation, is probably around $250 to $275 a square foot. That's what you can plan. And then a tenant improvement allowance, if the landlord's going to give you an allowance, meaning some money to make the improvements, they're usually going to amortize that money over the term of the lease. They're going to want a longer lease because the landlord's not going to lend you or, allocate tenant improvement allowance to you if you're just going to be there for a year or two. It doesn't make sense for them unless they are, unless they understand that, hey, I've got a building, I can lease this out to schools and it needs some work. I'm going to make an investment into my building here and, do so along with the tenant. They're going to pay a little bit, I'll pay a little bit. And then, when they move out, then you have a renovated building. So, it depends a lot on the landlord and their financial position too, as to whether or not, they're able to contribute. The larger landlords, more institutional landlords, usually can offer more than kind of your private mom and pop, like churches are really in the same boat that schools are a lot of times in terms of affordability. So it's a matter of who you're working with and the space.
Yeah. So you mentioned some, I'm calling them amenities, but that's not what they are. But like you mentioned, like the safety things, right? You have to have sprinklers or fire alarms built in, things like that. What are other maybe key features or amenities that schools should look for when assessing a potential facility? I know you mentioned ideally you'd love to have like a gym space or access to an outdoor space, but what are some other things that they should be looking for and searching?
So some of these things are not building driven, they're more site driven. Things like access and queuing, your traffic flow through a site. Those are probably one of like the top components of a site that we make sure are feasible to operate a school, or within. So sites that are too small or have poor access, they can't really be considered. Other aspect of security. The security is obviously a huge issue for schools. We want to make sure that, they have multiple points of security and asking, can this building be secured? Where would I have, a guard or, staff to make sure that, we're monitoring who's coming in and off the property, not just the building. And so, you have to look at your adjacencies and what uses are adjacent to any particular building. There's some that are more conducive to having a school neighbor and others that aren't. So if you've got like a busy shipment center, logistics center, you're not going to want to put that next to a school, although it might seem, like a good location in terms of just, proximity to residential or whatnot, but you've got to look at those things too. And then there's some uses that just are not good neighbors for schools. We know what those are.
Yeah.
Don't need to go in detail here. So, and then, just once you get past all of the site kind of parameters, then we can look at the building. Is it a newer building or is this an older building that is going to have maybe potentially environmental issues? Is there a sprinkler system? Is there an alarm system? Is it up to code for ADA compliance? And essentially you're going to need e-occupancy as the use group for the building, which is what you have to have on your certificate of occupancy to occupy the building as a school. There's various things that we just talked about. Those are required to get e-occupancy. a building. Unless, the use is grandfathered and it's just a change of tenancy. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So, you have to kind of do your homework, but you can usually tell. Well, I can't say you can usually tell. I can usually tell walking into a building I've walked into. Many of these have a good sense of whether or not it's going to work pretty much off the bat.
Going back to the team piece and just saying like, is that where the broker comes into play of making sure that there's these compliance pieces? Because you even mentioned like it's jurisdiction, like it depends on where you are and like what is required. Like, I think if I walked into a space, I wouldn't even know the questions to ask of like, oh, can we even bring this building up to code for occupancies and what should I be looking for? Is that something that the broker is looking for or is that something that, your project manager down the road is looking for? Who's gonna kind of flag those things for a school leader?
On the technical side, it's typically your project management consultant or your architect. They're the building professionals. Architects are obviously licensed, and it's their role to translate the code and make sure the building code and make sure that the school is in compliance. There's just so many little technical details that they handle in that respect. So what your project management consultant might do is help coordinate your architect. It kind of depends on the scale of the school. A newer school that's just starting out might, they could work with a management consultant, but they could just work directly with an architect too that helps to kind of vet out these items and more technical aspects of buildings.
Got it. I would love, Amy, because you've mentioned that you've been working with school leaders for about 9 years. I'm sure you have success stories. I would love to just, because again, probably these other leaders who are listening are like, there's got to be hope out there. For me, like, especially if they're in the thick of like in the search process right now. And it's like you said, the market changes rapidly, it feels like. And just even like from my time working with school leaders, I feel like the conversations look different 5 years ago than they do now. And just, yeah, like, do you have any success stories that you could share of where somebody has secured a facility that's met their needs and what did they, be that leader or just the team, do right in the process to make it there?
Well, I like to think they're all successful.
Well, if they're in a building, you're right. They are.
I try to be, to set my clients up for success as much as possible. And the facilities aspect of opening a school, while it's, the first thing that they've considered, right? If they're applying for their charter, there's their application, there's a lot of other things. And operating a school is another story, but getting the facilities right is really critical. And it really is the first step in opening, a location and opening a building or building a building is making sure that your facility is the right one in the right location. And you've worked out a good deal, hopefully. And when those things are not perfect. There's nothing that's ever perfect, but when they're not ideal, I think that those aspects really come out later on down the road, either in operations or budget. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that that's the right site for you and your school for whatever, period of time that you need it. So, my role really in the transactions that I see the most successful are where I'm able to bring both parties together and really fulfill all of everybody's needs, right? The school's needs, seller landlord needs. And that involves, a lot of conversations, a lot of understanding where people are coming from and, conveying each party's needs to the other side in a way that makes sense to both sides. Yeah. So, we've had some wild transactions. We've had some, very stressful ones that, some of them haven't closed, and you go through this whole process and then at the end of it, you're just like, here we go again. We got to start this whole process over. But most of our transactions, by the time we get to a contract, either a lease or a purchase and sale agreement, we've been through enough diligence to to know whether this is really feasible or not. There's always things that come up in a transaction that you've got to, kind of jump through hoops to get through. But, some kind of more unusual situations that we've had to deal with is this one always just stands out to me because I love animals. We had a bald eagle's nest on a property that we were buying and had to navigate how to deal with the bald eagle in a purchase transaction. It's not something that you can just like, sweep to the side and, just say, oh, we'll take care of it, because no, you've got to deal with like the Fish and Wildlife Department. And for an endangered species, you have to be cognizant of when their nesting season is. So you're not allowed to do any construction within a certain amount of distance from the nest during certain periods of the year. So we didn't go into the transaction thinking that we're going to have to plan construction around bald eagles mating, but there we were. So it actually, I think sometimes it's just like, what do they call it? Kismet, when everything just comes together, and it just worked out to where the end of the nesting season coincided with the beginning of our construction schedule. And so, it worked out, but you just have to work through those deals. And then, aside from that, we've dealt with some sellers that, have their own agenda. I had one seller that had felt like he was really robbed of $1,000 on a transaction he did on this property like years ago. And in order for us to get the deal done, his final term was, I need to be made whole on this $1,000 amount. So we had to add $1,000 onto the purchase price to make him whole, and then he was ready to go. But you run into funny things. But other transaction we've been able to complete that were really ultimately great for our clients are deals where the other side really understands the mission and what we're trying to accomplish. And we've had deals where we've had large charitable contributions from the seller that are, tax write-offs for them, but then also lower the purchase price for our clients. And also transactions where, the school would be maybe improving the building, and we're able to either partially or completely offset the rent for a certain period of time. So we're always looking at, creative ways to get good deals done for our clients. And it varies from deal to deal. And, in my position, I have to talk a lot. I have to get to the heart of what motivates people. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about my work is talking to people and putting successful deals together where everybody feels good about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. It is important. And I am grateful that there are churches and landlords who have invested themselves back into the schools in which they, that have now occupied their spaces, right? In whatever form that comes in, whether it is through, to dollars, or it's to volunteers, or it's, just working with them and realizing like these school leaders, right? Like have to be really good stewards of their dollars, and they have to, and they're not being selfish. Like they just want to create a space and have a space for students to perform at their best and to be at their safest and all of the things. So I think it's easy sometimes to think, especially if you're somebody who's maybe is from the suburbs and has had the new shiny building that just functioned perfectly, and realizing like this just isn't a reality for a lot of people. And so to be able to help, students have a space that they can go to is really important. And thank you for doing that. As somebody who's worked in a space that's unconventional, it's just nice to know that there's good people out there helping it to come to fruition. So we're almost at time, and I want to be respectful of it because I know you're busy, but as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else, Amy, that I missed, and that you're just like, if I walk away from this, this time together without these leaders knowing something, I'll feel terrible. So what else do they need to know?
I would say, if you're embarking on, this journey of site selection and finding a new facility, just be prepared. Know that this is something that you have to dedicate a lot of time to, and you've got to do your homework. You've got to, find the right people and your team of professionals to help you along. You're not alone. Nobody can do this alone. It's really a group effort. So, just make sure that you're prepared to embark on the mission, because it certainly is a mission in many ways. And the better prepared you are, the better off you're going to be to navigate this efficiently and hopefully successfully.
And you will survive on the other side. There is an end in sight. It will happen. Okay, well, I have one final question. I ask this of all of my guests as we wrap up our time, and it's in the spirit of my company's name, CheckBox Pro. What is one box, big or small, personal or professional, that you hope to check off today?
Well, I just sent an offer out, so I hope this conversation that I'm about to have goes really well. I need to check that box.
That's a great box. That's a great box to check off. Well, Amy, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I know some leaders that you're working with right now, and they just speak so highly of you. So keep doing the good work. Please keep, reading all those documents so that these school leaders have somebody to trust and, can put it into layman terms because, yeah, it's really overwhelming. It's really overwhelming. And I really, we want leaders to be able to focus on the other aspects of their job that are, driving the missions of their organizations forwards. And, real estate 101 is, better left to you. So, but again, thank you so much. Thank you all to our listeners, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Missy.
Hi, listeners. So after Amy and I wrapped up our conversation, and of course, I stopped recording, she mentioned this amazing service that she and her team offer. I thought it was too good not to have her tell you all about it. So we hopped back on, and she was with me again to now talk a bit more about their expanded demographic services that Insight EFS offers. So without further ado, take it away, Amy.
Thanks, Missy. Insight's now expanded our specialized demographic services. We've always provided our clients a certain level of demographic information, whether it be for just the initial site selection process or once we've targeted a site, giving specific information on that particular site. But we're now working with schools that are in multiple phases of their site selection or real estate process, from a startup school to schools that are growing or schools that are consolidating. So each one of those phases requires a different type of data set and analysis. And we're going really deep now into that analysis with our clients. So we use this data to help inform and guide our clients through either site selection or acquisition or disposition. And just to touch briefly on some of the services that this is including is tailored demographic sets by region. So schools that are maybe looking to expand into multiple cities within a state or multiple states. Each state, obviously, or region would have different information that would be relevant to them. Dynamic reports that are accessible on our platform and that we could give you access to, that you could provide to maybe your board members or any other stakeholders in your organization. And it's a live map that is really interesting to kind of flip between the different data sets and see how they overlay. And these are all education-based factors that we're looking at. So very, very specific to what an educational organization needs. So another thing that we do also is help you present or prepare presentations for perhaps your board meeting or any other stakeholder meeting that you would need to to present to. So if anyone is interested in our services, demographic services, please feel free to reach out.
That's so helpful. I'm also just thinking about, right, like every school right now is struggling with enrollment. So this is a great, resource to be able to have and a service to have to make sure that you're making informed decisions. And then I've talked to other, people on this podcast actually who have like green lighting metrics that they work on with their board. And what a great service to kind of come in and like actually round that out, because sometimes like the board and the leader aren't aligned, right, as when the right time is to expand or where to expand into. And so having just more data to potentially sway one side or the other is always clutch. So I think it's very timely, I should say.
It is. And really, you mentioned declining enrollment. That has been a very hot topic and a little bit elusive in trying to understand where students have gone. And so we've
Yeah.
worked on several projects that were analyzing that specifically for a consolidation of schools. So we had a client that had multiple schools in one region and needed to consolidate because their enrollment across that region was declining. And so they needed help in determining which school needed to be consolidated. So yeah, it's a very relevant topic. So
Yeah, perfect.
yeah.
Well, for our listeners, you can see the show notes to visit Insight's website. I'll have that linked there. I'm also going to pull this one pager of that kind of outlines these demographic services in a little bit more detail. So you can check that out. And of course, definitely reach out to their team if you're looking to expand, consolidate, just have general questions about facilities and what that process looks like. So Amy, thanks again for hopping on. I appreciate you, doing a round two with me. Listeners, thanks for hanging in there with us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all for listening to today's Pro Series conversation. Our team is always looking for more pros to learn from in the field of education. So if you have a recommendation for a future guest, or maybe you are the pro, then send us a note at info@checkboxpro.com. And if you want to hear from more pros, then like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And by doing so, this also helps more folks find our show. So take a moment to check that box off your list today.